The shovel hit the ground with a hollow thud that echoed across the empty plains. And Eleanor Grayson knew, before she even tried to dig, that this soil would fight her every step of the way. It was March of 1876, and the Colorado Territory sun beat down mercilessly on the small patch of land behind her weathered cabin just outside of Denver. The earth beneath her boots was cracked and pale, like the skin of something long dead, and about as willing to give life. Eleanor pushed a strand of dark hair from her forehead, leaving a smudge of dust across her brow. At 24 years old, she had already buried one husband and most of her dreams along with him, but she would not bury her will to survive. The cabin itself sat on the outskirts of what could barely be called a settlement, a collection of buildings that had sprung up along the route to the mining camps in the mountains. Her late husband Thomas had bought the property with grand visions of farming, of building something lasting. He had been dead 6 months now, taken by pneumonia during the brutal winter, and Eleanor had spent those months learning just how many things a woman alone could not do in this unforgiving territory. She pushed the shovel down again, putting her weight behind it. The blade scraped against rock and hard, packed earth, barely penetrating. Sweat trickled down her spine beneath the simple cotton dress she wore, already faded from too many washings and too much sun. She had seeds saved from last year, carefully hoarded in cloth sacks inside the cabin. Beans, squash, a few precious tomato seeds. If she could just get them into the ground, if she could just coax something to grow, she might make it through another winter without having to sell the land and return east in defeat. The problem was not just the soil, though that was bad enough. It was water, or the lack of it. The creek that Thomas had promised ran year-round had proven to be little more than a trickle by summer's end. It was the wind that scoured everything bare. It was the late frosts and early snows, and the 100 other ways this land seemed designed to break the spirit of anyone foolish enough to try taming it. Eleanor had been working for perhaps an hour when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. She straightened, one hand going to shade her eyes against the sun, the other still gripping the shovel. A rider was approaching from the direction of town, coming at an easy pace that suggested someone who was not in any particular hurry. Out here, unexpected visitors could mean trouble as easily as help, so Eleanor held her ground and waited. The rider resolved into a man on a sturdy bay horse, both of them dusty from the road. As he drew closer, Eleanor could make out more details. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt. A hat shaded his face, but she could see the glint of fair hair beneath it. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more of his life on horseback than off it. He pulled up about 10 feet from where she stood, and when he touched the brim of his hat in greeting, she could finally see his face properly. He was perhaps in his late 20s, with a strong jaw shadowed by a few days' worth of stubble, and eyes that were a startling pale blue, the color of ice on a winter creek. There was something kind in those eyes, though, something that made Eleanor relax her grip on the shovel just slightly. "Madam," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I do not mean to intrude. Name is Samuel Jameson. I am looking for the widow Grayson." Eleanor felt her spine stiffen slightly at the title, though she knew she would have to get used to it. "I am Eleanor Grayson," she said, keeping her voice level. "What business do you have with me?" Samuel Jameson dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping his horse's reins loosely in one hand. Up close, he was even taller than she had thought, and there was a lean strength to him that spoke of hard work and harder living. "I was in town yesterday, at the general store. Mr. Peterson mentioned you might be looking for help around the place. I am between jobs at the moment, and I know my way around a farm." Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse. She had little enough money to feed herself, let alone pay a hired hand. But something made her pause. Maybe it was the respectful way he had asked, keeping his distance, making no assumptions. Maybe it was the simple fact that her back already ached from the little work she had managed, and the garden plot stretched before her like a small desert. "I cannot pay much," she said carefully, "and the work is hard. The soil here is not kind." Samuel glanced past her at the small patch of turned earth, at the shovel that had barely scratched the surface. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes suggested he understood exactly what she was up against. "I can see that," he said, "but I have worked hard soil before. And as for payment, well, room and board would be enough for now if you have it, and maybe a small wage when you can manage it." It was more than fair. It was generous to the point of making Eleanor suspicious. "Why would you work for so little?" she asked directly. "There are mining camps in the hills paying good money for laborers." For the first time, something like a smile touched the corners of Samuel's mouth. "Those camps are rough places, madam. Men drinking and fighting, and the work is dangerous. I have done my time in dark holes in the ground. I prefer to see the sky while I work, if it is all the same." He paused, then added more quietly, "And I heard in town that you lost your husband this winter. I lost my own parents to illness a few years back. I know what it is to be alone and trying to make a go of it." The simple honesty in his words struck something in Eleanor's chest, a chord of recognition. She studied his face, looking for signs of deceit or hidden motives, but found none. What she saw was a man who looked tired, yes, but also steady, solid. The kind of person who might actually mean what he said. "The cabin is small," she said slowly. "There is a lean-to out back where Thomas kept tools. You could sleep there if we cleared it out, and I can manage 3 meals a day, though they will not be fancy." Samuel's expression softened with something that might have been relief. "That sounds fine, madam, more than fine." "Eleanor," she said, making the decision even as she spoke, "if you are going to be working here, you can call me Eleanor. And I suppose you should put your horse in the small corral around the side. There is not much grazing, but there is a bit, and I can spare some feed." Over the next few hours, as the afternoon sun tracked across the sky, Eleanor watched Samuel work and began to understand that she had made a very good decision. He moved with purpose but without wasted motion, first tending to his horse, then helping her clear out the lean-to. It was full of broken tools and old lumber, things Thomas had saved with vague intentions of fixing or using someday. Samuel sorted through it all with practiced efficiency, setting aside what could be salvaged and stacking the rest for kindling. By the time Eleanor called him in for supper, the lean-to had been transformed into a serviceable sleeping space. Samuel had even found an old cot frame and repaired it with some of the salvaged lumber. The meal was simple, just beans and cornbread with a bit of salt pork, but Samuel ate with genuine appreciation, complimenting her cooking in a way that seemed sincere rather than flattering. After supper, as the light faded to purple in the west, they sat on the cabin's small porch and Eleanor told him about the land, about Thomas's plans and how they had foundered. Samuel listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The soil is bad," he said finally, "but it is not hopeless. I have seen worse coaxed into producing. The trick is going to be building it up, adding what it lacks. There is a creek a few miles north of here, runs stronger than the one on your property. We could haul water if we need to. And there are things we can do to hold moisture in the soil to give it some life." "What kinds of things?" Eleanor asked, surprised by the we in his statement, by how easily he had included himself in her struggles. "Composting," Samuel said. "Anything organic we can get our hands on. Animal manure if we can find it, kitchen scraps, grass clippings if the grass ever grows enough to clip. We work it into the soil, let it break down, and it will start to change the structure. It takes time, but it works. And we can try mulching, using straw or old hay to cover the ground around the plants once they come up. Keeps the moisture from evaporating so fast. Eleanor felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, something she had not felt since before Thomas died. It was hope, fragile as a spring seedling, but real nonetheless. "You really think we can make it work?" Samuel turned to look at her then, and in the fading light, his eyes were serious. "I think anything is possible if you want it badly enough and are willing to work for it. And Eleanor, I get the sense you are not the kind of woman who gives up easy." She felt heat rise to her cheeks at the compliment and was grateful for the dimness that hid it. "No," she said softly, "I am not." That night, lying in her narrow bed inside the cabin, Eleanor listened to the familiar sounds of the prairie night. The wind in the grass, the distant yip of coyotes, the creak of the cabin's timbers. But there was something new now, too, a sense of another presence nearby, of not being quite so alone anymore. She thought of Samuel in the lean-to and found the thought comforting rather than alarming. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without the weight of fear pressing on her chest. The work began in earnest the next morning. Samuel was up before dawn, and Eleanor woke to the sound of him working outside. By the time she had dressed and started breakfast, he had already begun the serious task of breaking up the hard-pan soil. He had found an old pickaxe among Thomas's tools and was using it to fracture the compacted earth, creating channels that would allow water and air to penetrate deeper. Eleanor brought him coffee and biscuits as the sun climbed higher, and he took a brief break to eat. His shirt was already dark with sweat despite the morning coolness, and there was dirt under his fingernails and streaked across his forearms. But he smiled when he took the cup from her and said, "This is good coffee, strong enough to stand on." "That is how my father drank it," Eleanor said. "He said weak coffee was not worth the water it took to make." "Smart man," Samuel said. He drank deeply, then added, "I have been thinking. There is a ranch about 10 miles east of here, the Running M. I worked there for a spell last year. The owner, Mr. Morrison, is a decent man. He might be willing to part with some aged manure from his stock pens, especially if I offer to haul it myself. That would give us something to work into this soil, give it some nutrients." "That would be good," Eleanor said, "but I hate to ask for charity." Samuel shook his head. "It would not be charity. Most ranchers are happy to have someone cart away their manure. It builds up and they have to deal with it somehow anyway. We would be doing him a favor, really." Eleanor was not entirely sure that was true, but she appreciated Samuel trying to preserve her pride. "When would you go?" "Tomorrow, maybe. Today I want to get this plot properly broken up, and we should start a compost heap with what we have." "You save your kitchen scraps." "I have been," Eleanor admitted. "And there is some old hay in the shed that has gotten moldy and is not fit for the horse." "Perfect," Samuel said with satisfaction. "We will get that started today." They worked together through the morning, falling into an easy rhythm. Samuel broke up the soil while Eleanor gathered materials for the compost. She found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, noticing the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt, the concentration on his face as he worked. There was something appealing about his competence, about the way he approached each task with quiet determination. By midday, they had made real progress. The garden plot, which had seemed so hopelessly barren the day before, now looked at least workable. The soil was broken up, ready to be amended. They had started a compost pile in a corner near the cabin, layering the old hay and kitchen scraps with some of the less hopeless soil. Eleanor made lunch, slicing bread and cheese, and they ate sitting in the shade of the cabin. Samuel told her about his life, about growing up on a farm in Missouri before his parents died, about drifting west looking for work and purpose. There was a loneliness in his story that resonated with Eleanor's own experience, and she found herself sharing more than she had intended about her own past. She told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, about marrying Thomas when she was 19, and believing his stories about the opportunities in the West, about the hard journey out, about the gradual realization that Thomas, for all his enthusiasm, had not really known what he was getting into. She did not speak ill of him, but she was honest about the struggles, about how unprepared they had been. "He meant well," Samuel said when she finished. "That counts for something." "It does," Eleanor agreed. "But meaning well does not dig wells or plant crops or keep the snow out of a cabin with gaps in the chinking." Samuel looked at the cabin with new attention. "Those gaps should be fixed before next winter," he said. "We can gather mud and grass, make a good chinking compound. It will help hold the heat in when the cold comes." Eleanor felt that flutter of hope again, stronger this time. The casual way Samuel said "we," the way he spoke of next winter as if it was simply assumed he would still be here, still helping. She should probably not let herself count on that, should protect herself against the disappointment of him leaving like so many others had. But she found she could not quite muster the cynicism. There was something in Samuel's steady presence that inspired trust. The next day, as promised, Samuel rode out to the Running M Ranch. He left early, saying he wanted to be back before dark. Eleanor spent the day on her own tasks, washing clothes in the creek, mending torn seams in her dresses, weeding around the few scraggly plants that Thomas had managed to get growing last year. They were mostly herbs, tough things that had survived neglect, and she tended them carefully, grateful for their persistence. Samuel returned in late afternoon, and Eleanor heard the wagon before she saw it. She came around the cabin to find him driving a borrowed buckboard loaded with burlap sacks that emanated an unmistakable odor. "Mr. Morrison sends his regards," Samuel called out, pulling the horses to a stop. "And he said to tell you that, if you have any vegetables to spare come harvest time, he would be glad to trade for them. His cook is tired of serving nothing but beef and beans." Eleanor felt absurdly touched by the message, by this small gesture of neighborliness from a man she had never met. "That is kind of him. He is a good man," Samuel said, climbing down from the wagon, "and he gave us enough here to make a real difference. Shall we get it spread while there is still light?" They worked together, hauling the aged manure to the garden plot and working it into the soil Samuel had broken up. It was hard, smelly work, but Eleanor did not complain. She could see the difference it was making, could see how the pale, dead-looking earth was darkening, gaining texture and substance. By the time the sun was setting, the entire garden plot had been amended, transformed from dust into something that looked like it might actually support life. That night over supper, Eleanor found herself laughing at something Samuel said, a small joke about the chickens she kept that was not even particularly funny. But it had been so long since she had laughed, since she had felt light enough for laughter, that the sound surprised her. Samuel smiled at her response, and there was warmth in his eyes that made something in her chest tighten in a way that was not entirely uncomfortable. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. They worked together in the mornings, tackling the endless tasks that life on a homestead demanded. Samuel repaired the corral fence, fixed the cabin's leaking roof, shored up the foundation where it had started to settle. Eleanor cooked and cleaned and helped with whatever task needed an extra pair of hands. They planted the garden together, spacing the seeds carefully in rows, watering them with precious buckets of water hauled from the creek. And slowly, impossibly, Things began to grow. The first green shoots appeared a week after planting, tiny and fragile but undeniably alive. Eleanor found herself checking on them multiple times a day, hardly daring to believe they were real. Samuel caught her kneeling in the dirt one morning, staring at the emerging seedlings with wonder on her face, and he smiled at her with such understanding that she felt seen in a way she had not experienced in years. "They are going to make it," he said softly. "You are going to have a garden." "We," Eleanor corrected without thinking, "we are going to have a garden." Something shifted in Samuel's expression, a flash of emotion quickly controlled. "Yes," he said, "we are." As spring progressed into early summer, the garden flourished. The beans climbed the stakes Samuel had constructed. The squash spread their broad leaves. The tomato plants, still small but healthy, promised future fruit. Every day brought new growth, new proof that the barren soil could indeed support life if given what it needed. But it was not just the garden that was growing. Eleanor found herself increasingly aware of Samuel's presence, of the way he moved, of the sound of his voice. She noticed how he always made sure she had the shadier spot when they worked together in the heat, how he saved the easier tasks for her without making it obvious, how he listened when she talked, really listened, as if her thoughts and opinions mattered. One evening in June, they were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the sky turn colors as the sun set behind the mountains. Samuel had been quiet for a while, and when Eleanor glanced at him, she found him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. "What is it?" she asked. Samuel was quiet for another moment, then said, "I have been thinking I should probably move on soon. Head up to the mining camps or find ranch work for the summer. I did not mean to stay this long." Eleanor felt her heart drop into her stomach. She had known, of course, that this was temporary. Samuel had made no promises, had committed to nothing beyond helping her get the garden started. But somehow, without her quite realizing it, she had begun to think of him as a permanent fixture, as part of her life going forward. "Oh," she said, and was proud that her voice came out steady. "Of course. You have been more than generous with your time." Samuel looked down at his hands. "The thing is," he said slowly, "I do not really want to go. I have been happier these past weeks than I have been in years. Waking up with a purpose, working towards something that matters, being around." He trailed off, then continued even more quietly, "Being around you." Eleanor's breath caught. "Samuel." He turned to face her fully. "I know it has not been even a year since you lost your husband. I know you probably are not ready to think about anything like that. But Eleanor, I need you to know that what I feel for you is not just gratitude for the work and the meals. It is more than that. You are strong and smart, and you do not give up even when everything is against you. You are beautiful, though I do not think you realize it. And when you smile, which you are doing more often now, it feels like sunshine." Eleanor felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She had not cried since the funeral, had not let herself feel much of anything beyond determination and exhaustion. But now, hearing Samuel's words, something was breaking open inside her. "I am not ready to marry again," she said, and saw him flinch slightly. "But Samuel, I do not want you to leave. I have been dreading the thought of you going, of being alone again. These weeks, working with you, talking with you, it has been—" She searched for words. "It has been like coming back to life after being numb for so long." Samuel reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand. His palm was calloused from work, warm and solid. "Then I will stay," he said, "for as long as you want me here, and I will not push for anything you are not ready to give. I just needed you to know how I feel." Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, at the way her smaller fingers fit between his larger ones. "I think," she said carefully, that I might be starting to feel the same way. It frightens me how quickly it has happened. It has only been a few weeks." "Sometimes you just know," Samuel said. "My father told me once that he knew he would marry my mother the first day he met her. I always thought he was exaggerating, but now—" He squeezed her hand gently. "Now I think maybe he was telling the truth." They sat like that as the stars came out, holding hands and not talking, just being present with each other. Eleanor felt something settling in her chest, a rightness that she had not felt since before Thomas got sick. Maybe before that, even. She had cared for Thomas, had tried to be a good wife, but she could admit now, if only to herself, that there had never been this spark, this sense of connection that seemed to exist between her and Samuel. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest Eleanor could remember. She and Samuel worked together during the days, their movements synchronized as if they had been partners for years instead of months. The garden thrived under their care, the plants growing lush and strong. They harvested the first beans in late June, and Eleanor felt a fierce pride at the sight of them, proof that her barren soil could indeed sustain life. But it was the evenings she treasured most. They had taken to sitting together after supper, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying the quiet. Samuel had begun teaching her to play checkers, using a set he had carved from scrap wood. Eleanor was a quick learner and had begun winning more often than not, which made Samuel laugh and accuse her of hustling him. One night in early July, as they were clearing away the supper dishes, a sudden summer storm blew in. The sky, clear just minutes before, turned black and threatening. Wind whipped through the canyon, bending the grass flat, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. "Get inside," Samuel called, but Eleanor was already running toward the garden, toward the fragile plants that represented so much work and hope. Samuel was right behind her, and together they worked frantically to stake the tomatoes more securely, to reinforce the bean poles. The rain came harder, soaking them both in minutes, and lightning cracked across the sky close enough to make Eleanor jump. Samuel grabbed her hand. "Come on, it is not safe out here." They ran for the cabin, stumbling through mud that had formed almost instantly in the hard, packed yard. Eleanor's skirts were heavy with water, clinging to her legs, and she nearly fell on the porch steps. Samuel caught her, his arm around her waist, and they tumbled through the door together. Dripping and breathless, for a moment they just stood there, catching their breath, water pooling on the floor around them. Then Eleanor started to laugh, great gasping laughs at the absurdity of it all, and Samuel joined in. When their laughter finally subsided, Eleanor became aware that Samuel still had his arm around her, that they were standing very close, that he was looking at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Eleanor," he said, his voice rough, may I kiss you?" She did not trust her voice, so she simply nodded. Samuel moved slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, but she did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was gentle at first, questioning. But when Eleanor leaned into him, when her hands came up to rest on his chest, the kiss deepened. It was nothing like kissing Thomas, which had always been perfunctory, a duty more than a pleasure. This was heat and want and connection, and when they finally broke apart, Eleanor was shaking. "I am sorry," Samuel started, but Eleanor shook her head. "Do not be sorry," she said. I have wanted that for weeks now." Samuel's eyes searched hers. "Are you sure? I do not want to rush you or make you feel." Eleanor silenced him with another kiss, this one briefer but no less intense. "I am sure," she said when she pulled back. "I know it has not been a year. I know people will talk. But Samuel, I do not want to wait any more. Life is too short and too hard to deny ourselves happiness when we find it." Outside, the storm raged, but inside the small cabin, Eleanor felt safer and warmer than she had in longer than she could remember. They changed into dry clothes in careful privacy, Eleanor behind a screen while Samuel used the lean-to. When they were both dry, they sat by the fire Samuel had built, close enough that their shoulders touched, and talked late into the night. Samuel told her about his dreams, about wanting a place of his own someday, land he could work and improve and pass on to children if he was blessed with them. Eleanor shared her fears about the future, about whether she could really make the homestead work, whether she was fooling herself to think she could survive out here. "You are not alone anymore," Samuel said, taking her hand. "Whatever comes, we will face it together, if you will have me, Eleanor. I know I do not have much to offer. I have some money saved, but not a lot. What I have is a strong back and a willingness to work, and a heart that is completely yours if you want it." Eleanor felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I want it," she whispered. "And I want you to have mine." They did not sleep together that night, propriety and Eleanor's own sense of rightness holding them back from that final step. But they did fall asleep on the floor by the fire, wrapped in blankets, Eleanor's head on Samuel's shoulder and his arm around her, and it felt more intimate than anything Eleanor had experienced in her brief marriage. The next morning dawned clear and washed clean. The garden had survived the storm, and if anything looked more vibrant for the watering. Samuel and Eleanor surveyed it together, standing close, and Eleanor felt a bone-deep contentment that she had never known before. "We should probably think about when we want to get married," Samuel said, his tone casual but his body tense, as if he was worried she might have changed her mind overnight. Eleanor turned to look at him, this man who had appeared in her life when she needed him most, who had seen her at her lowest and had not judged but had simply rolled up his sleeves and helped. "Soon," she said. "I do not want to wait. Is that terrible of me?" Samuel's face broke into a smile that transformed his whole face. "It is not terrible. It is perfect. We could ride into Denver next week, see the preacher there." "Next week," Eleanor agreed and felt a thrill of excitement mixed with nerves. "That gives me time to make a new dress at least. I will not get married in my work clothes." Samuel laughed and pulled her into an embrace. "You could get married in a flour sack and still be the most beautiful bride in Colorado territory." The week passed in a blur of preparation. Eleanor worked on her dress in the evenings, a simple design in blue calico that she had been saving for something special. Samuel rode out to neighboring homesteads and ranches, spreading the word that they would be married and inviting anyone who wished to attend. It was a small community, spread out over miles of rough country, but the people who made their lives here tended to take care of their own. On the morning they were to leave for Denver, Eleanor woke with butterflies in her stomach. She dressed carefully in her new dress, pinning up her hair in a way that she hoped looked elegant. When she emerged from the cabin, she found Samuel waiting with the wagon hitched and cleaned, wearing what were clearly his best clothes. He had shaved and combed his hair, and Eleanor's breath caught at how handsome he looked. "You are beautiful," Samuel said, his voice full of wonder. "Eleanor, you take my breath away." They drove to Denver through the summer morning, the mountains rising purple and white in the distance. The town was busier than Eleanor had seen it, miners and cowboys and settlers all going about their business. Samuel drove straight to the small church near the center of town, where they had arranged to meet the preacher. The Reverend Michaels was a kindly older man who had known Thomas and had presided at his funeral. If he had any reservations about Eleanor remarrying so soon, he kept them to himself. Instead, he welcomed them both warmly and asked if they were ready to proceed. "We are," Eleanor said, and meant it with her whole heart. The ceremony was simple, Just the Reverend and a couple of townspeople pulled in to serve as witnesses. But when Samuel took Eleanor's hands in his and spoke his vows, promising to love and cherish her for all his days, there was nothing simple about the emotion in his voice. And when Eleanor made her own promises, she felt the truth of them settling into her bones, becoming part of her. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Michael said with a smile. "Samuel, you may kiss your bride." And he did, a kiss that was both chaste enough for the public setting and full enough of promise to make Eleanor's toes curl in her boots. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling, and the small handful of witnesses applauded. They spent their wedding night in a boarding house in Denver, a luxury that Samuel had insisted on. The room was small but clean, with a real bed and curtains on the windows. Eleanor had been nervous, her only experience with the marriage bed being the dutiful but unsatisfying encounters with Thomas. But Samuel was patient and gentle, and there was a passion between them that surprised and delighted her. When they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, both breathless and glowing, Eleanor felt as if she had discovered something she had not even known was missing from her life. "I love you," Samuel murmured into her hair. "I do not think I have said that yet, but I do. I love you, Eleanor." "I love you too," Eleanor said, and realized it was completely true. Somewhere in the past months, between the planting and the growing and the simple act of working side by side, she had fallen deeply and irrevocably in love with this good, steady man. "I did not think I would ever feel this way." "Neither did I," Samuel admitted. "I had started to think maybe I was just meant to drift, to never really belong anywhere. But with you, Eleanor, I feel like I have come home." They returned to the homestead the next afternoon, and Eleanor saw it with new eyes. It was still small and rough around the edges, still surrounded by hard country that would fight them for every inch. But it was theirs now, truly theirs, and it represented possibility rather than struggle. The garden continued to thrive as summer progressed. They harvested beans and squash regularly, and the tomatoes finally began to ripen, heavy and red and perfect. Samuel had been right about Mr. Morrison being interested in fresh vegetables. He sent a hand by in mid-August asking if they had any to spare, and Eleanor sent back 2-bushel baskets full, receiving in return a side of beef and a generous payment in cash. "Look at this," Eleanor said to Samuel that evening, staring at the money in disbelief. "I never imagined the garden could actually make money." Samuel grinned at her. "You have a gift, Eleanor. Everything you touch seems to grow, and this is just the beginning. Next year we can expand, plant even more. We could become known for having the best vegetables in this part of the territory." Eleanor felt that now familiar flutter of hope and excitement. "Next year," she said, savoring the words. "I like the sound of that." As autumn approached, they worked together to preserve the harvest. Eleanor taught Samuel how to can vegetables, and he proved to be a surprisingly adept student. They put up jars of tomatoes and beans, pickled the cucumbers that had unexpectedly flourished in one corner of the garden. The root cellar, which had been nearly empty the previous winter, gradually filled with food that they had grown with their own hands. They also worked on improving the homestead itself. Samuel chinked the cabin's gaps as he had promised, making it snug against the coming cold. He built a proper chicken coop, larger than the ramshackle structure that had existed before, and Eleanor bought 6 more hens with some of the money from selling vegetables. He repaired the barn and shored up the fences. In late September, Samuel came to Eleanor with a proposal. "I have been thinking," he said. "We have a bit of money saved now, and winter is coming. What would you think about buying a cow, a milk cow? We could use the milk and make butter and cheese to sell along with the vegetables come spring." Eleanor considered it. It would be a significant investment, and caring for a cow would add to their workload, but it would also provide them with more security, more diversification. "I think it is a good idea," she said. "Where would we get one? Mr. Morrison has a dairy cow that just calved. He said he would sell us the mother for a fair price, since he only needs one milker. And the calf is a female, so in a couple of years we could have 2 cows, maybe start building a small herd." They bought the cow the next week, a gentle Jersey with soft brown eyes that Eleanor named Buttercup. Samuel taught Eleanor to milk her, his hands guiding hers until she got the rhythm right. It was another thing to add to their growing list of competencies, another way they were learning to not just survive but thrive on this difficult land. That winter was nothing like the one before. The cabin was warm and tight, the cellar full of food. They had Buttercup's milk and butter, eggs from the expanded chicken flock, and the beef Mr. Morrison had traded them. When the snows came and isolated them for days at a time, Eleanor did not feel the creeping panic that had plagued her the previous year. Instead, she felt cozy and safe, sitting by the fire with Samuel, playing checkers or reading aloud from the few books they owned. On Christmas Eve, Samuel presented Eleanor with a gift, a beautiful wooden box that he had made from scrap lumber, carefully sanded and oiled until it glowed. "For your seeds," he said, "to keep them safe and organized." Eleanor ran her fingers over the smooth wood, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It is beautiful, Samuel. Thank you." She handed him her own gift, a shirt she had sewn from fabric she had carefully hoarded, made to fit his broad shoulders perfectly. Samuel held it up, clearly moved. "Eleanor, you did not have to, I wanted to," she interrupted. "You have given me so much, Samuel. A future, hope, love. A shirt seems a small thing in comparison." Samuel set the shirt aside carefully and pulled Eleanor into his arms. "You have given me all those things too," he said. "I was drifting before I met you, just going through the motions. You gave my life meaning." They made love that night with particular tenderness, and afterward, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Eleanor found herself thinking about the future. She was 25 now, Samuel was 28. They had talked vaguely about children, but so far Eleanor had not conceived. She was not sure if she was relieved or disappointed by that. Children would be wonderful, but they would also add another layer of hardship to their already difficult life. As if reading her thoughts, Samuel said softly, "Do you want children, Eleanor? We have never really talked about it." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I do," she said finally. "Someday. But I am also content with how things are now, just the 2 of us. We have time." "We do," Samuel agreed. "And whatever comes, we will handle it together." Spring came again, and with it the renewal of the cycle. They expanded the garden, breaking new ground now that they knew the soil could be made to produce. Samuel had continued to improve it over the winter, adding more compost, and the earth was noticeably darker and richer than it had been the year before. They planted a wider variety this year, adding corn and carrots and lettuce to their existing crops. Eleanor started some flowers too, just for the beauty of it, and Samuel teased her gently about her frivolous streak. But she saw him pause sometimes to look at the small patch of bright blooms, and there was appreciation in his eyes. Word had spread over the winter about the quality of their vegetables, and they had several standing orders before the plants even sprouted. Mr. Morrison wanted to buy whatever they could spare. A restaurant that had opened in Denver wanted regular deliveries. Even some of the mining camps sent word that they would pay good prices for fresh food. "We are going to need help if we are going to fill all these orders," Samuel said one evening in early May, surveying the garden with a mixture of pride and consternation. "It is too much for just the 2 of us." They hired a young man named Danny, a farmer's son from Kansas who was trying to save money to buy his own place someday. He was 19, hardworking and eager to learn, and he fit into their little household easily. He slept in the barn, which Samuel had converted partly into living quarters, and ate meals with them. Eleanor found she enjoyed having the extra company, the additional voice at the dinner table. That summer was one of bounty. The expanded garden produced more than even Samuel had predicted. They sold vegetables as fast as they could harvest them, and the money accumulated in the wooden box Samuel had given Eleanor, now repurposed as their savings repository. By autumn, they had enough saved to make some significant improvements. "We should build a proper house," Samuel said one night. "Something bigger than this cabin, with multiple rooms. A place fit for a family." Eleanor looked around the small cabin that had been her home for nearly 3 years now. It was full of memories, some painful from those hard months after Thomas died, but mostly good ones now, memories of building a life with Samuel. But Samuel was right. If they were going to continue growing, both the farm and potentially their family, they needed more space. "Where would we build it?" she asked. Samuel had clearly been thinking about this. "Up on that rise to the east. It has a good view, and it is high enough that we would not have to worry about flooding from the creek if it ever runs high. We could build in stone and timber, make it solid enough to last generations." The idea appealed to Eleanor more than she had expected. A house they designed together, built with their own hands and their own vision. "Let's do it," she said. They broke ground on the new house in early October, after the harvest was in. Samuel had experience with construction from his years of drifting and working various jobs, and he approached the project with his characteristic methodical determination. They would work on it through the winter, he explained, when the farm work slowed. With Danny's help and occasional assistance from neighboring homesteaders who Samuel traded labor with, they could have it ready by next summer. The foundation went in first, laid with stones hauled from a quarry 10 miles away. It was backbreaking work, but Eleanor insisted on helping, loading the wagon and mixing mortar alongside the men. The walls began to rise slowly, stone by stone, and Eleanor could start to see the shape of what it would become. In November, Eleanor realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another month to be sure, but when December came and went with no sign, she knew. She told Samuel on a cold evening, the two of them alone in the cabin, Danny having gone into town for supplies. "I am pregnant," she said simply, watching his face for his reaction. Samuel's eyes went wide, and then a smile broke across his face like sunrise. "Truly, Eleanor, are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor confirming it. I feel different, tired in a way I have not been before, and my courses are 2 months late." Samuel crossed the small space between them in 2 strides and gathered her into his arms, gentle now, as if she had suddenly become fragile. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. She had not been sure how she would feel when this moment came, but now that it was here, she felt overwhelmingly happy. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased." Samuel pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright. "Eleanor, I am overjoyed, terrified but overjoyed." "That makes 2 of us," Eleanor admitted. "I keep thinking of all the things that could go wrong, all the ways this country is dangerous for children." Samuel's expression grew serious. "I will not lie to you and say there are no dangers. But Eleanor, our child will have 2 parents who love each other and who will do everything in our power to keep them safe and give them a good life. That is more than a lot of children have." The pregnancy progressed through the winter months. Eleanor was sick in the mornings for the first few months, which made the work harder, but she pushed through it. Samuel became almost comically protective, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy lifting or strenuous work. Eleanor had to remind him repeatedly that she was pregnant, not broken, and that women had been working through pregnancy since the beginning of time. But she was touched by his concern, by the way he would rub her aching back at the end of the day, by how he made sure she had the most comfortable chair and the warmest spot by the fire. And as her belly began to swell, as the baby's movements became stronger and more frequent, Samuel would place his hand on her stomach and talk to the child, telling them about the world they would enter, about the garden and the farm and the life they were building. The new house continued to rise. By the time spring came again, the walls were up and the roof was on. They moved in early May, when Eleanor was 7 months along, and it felt like stepping into a palace. There was a large main room with a real stone fireplace, 2 bedrooms, and even a small room that Samuel said could be a study or a sewing room. The kitchen had a proper iron stove that Samuel had traded labor to obtain, and windows that let in light and air. Eleanor stood in the center of the empty main room, her hands on her swollen belly, and felt a wave of emotion so strong it nearly brought her to her knees. 3 years ago she had been a widow with nothing but a barren patch of ground and fading hope. Now she had a home, a husband she loved desperately, a thriving farm, and a child on the way. "Thank you," she said to Samuel, who was watching her with concern. "For what?" he asked. "For everything. For stopping that day, for staying, for helping me believe this was possible, for loving me." Samuel crossed to her and took her hands. "I am the one who should be thanking you. You let me in when you had every reason to guard your heart. You gave me a home and a purpose and a family. I was nothing before I met you, Eleanor. You made me into the man I wanted to be." Their son was born in early July, during a thunderstorm that reminded Eleanor of the night she and Samuel had first kissed. The labor was long and difficult, attended by a midwife from a neighboring homestead, and with Samuel pacing anxiously in the next room. But when it was over, when Eleanor held her son for the first time, all the pain and fear melted away. They named him Thomas Samuel, honoring both the husband Eleanor had lost and the man who had become her true partner. Little Tommy had his father's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair that Eleanor insisted came from her side of the family. He was healthy and strong-lunged, making his presence known from the very beginning. Samuel was a natural father, patient and gentle despite his obvious nervousness. He would walk Tommy around the house in the middle of the night when the baby was fussy, talking to him in a low voice about the farm, about the crops, about the future they were building. Eleanor would watch them sometimes, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. Danny, who had stayed on as their hired hand and had become almost like family, was delighted with the baby. He carved Tommy a set of wooden blocks and proved surprisingly adept at getting the baby to smile. Eleanor and Samuel discussed making him a full partner in the farm operation, giving him a share of the profits in exchange for his continued hard work and loyalty. That summer was busy in a new way. Eleanor had to learn to balance caring for Tommy with the endless demands of the farm. It was exhausting, but it was also deeply satisfying. She would work in the garden with Tommy sleeping in a basket in the shade nearby, or cook dinner with him tied to her back in a sling that one of the neighbor women had shown her how to make. The farm continued to prosper. Their reputation for quality produce had spread throughout the region, and they could hardly keep up with the demand. Samuel and Danny discussed expanding even further, perhaps hiring another hand or two for the next growing season. On a warm evening in September, when Tommy was 2 months old, Eleanor and Samuel sat on the porch of their new house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Tommy was asleep in Eleanor's arms, a warm, solid weight that still felt like a miracle. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Eleanor asked softly. "If you had not stopped that day, if I had turned you away." Samuel reached over and took her free hand, lacing their fingers together. "I try not to," he said. "It hurts to imagine a life without you and Tommy in it, but I suppose we were lucky in a way. We found each other when we both needed it most." "It was not luck," Eleanor said. "It was you being kind enough to help a widow in need. It was me being brave enough to accept that help and to risk my heart again. It was both of us being willing to work for what we wanted." Samuel smiled. "Maybe you are right. Maybe we made our own luck." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Tommy's soft breathing the only sound besides the evening songs of birds and crickets. Eleanor thought about the garden, about how she had started with barren soil and had managed, with Samuel's help, to coax life from it. But the garden had been just the beginning. What they had really grown was something much more precious, a love that had taken root in equally unlikely circumstances, had weathered storms and struggles, and had bloomed into something beautiful and lasting. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. There were droughts that tested their irrigation systems and their resolve. There were early frosts that took portions of their crops. Tommy went through childhood illnesses that left Eleanor sleepless with worry. But through it all, Eleanor and Samuel faced each challenge as they had faced that first barren garden plot, together with determination and love. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Sarah when Tommy was 3, and another son, James, 2 years after that. The house that had seemed so spacious when they first built, it gradually filled with the noise and chaos of family life. Eleanor had to expand her garden yet again, adding rows of vegetables to feed her growing household. Danny did indeed become a partner in the farm, and eventually married a young woman from town, a schoolteacher named Mary who proved to be as hardworking as she was educated. They built their own house on the far side of the property, and their children grew up playing with Eleanor and Samuel's, the 2 families knit together by years of shared labor and mutual respect. The farm became known throughout Colorado Territory, and eventually throughout the state after Colorado achieved statehood in 1876. People came from miles around to buy Eleanor's vegetables and to learn her secrets for growing in difficult soil. She always shared her knowledge freely, remembering how hopeless she had felt when she first started trying to make that barren ground produce. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel surprised Eleanor with a gift. He led her out to the original garden plot, the place where it had all started, and showed her what he had built there. It was a small gazebo, carefully constructed from wood he had been secretly working on for months, with a bench inside just big enough for 2. "I thought we needed a place to sit and remember," he said. "This is where we started, where we learned to grow things together. I never want to forget that." Eleanor sat on the bench and pulled Samuel down beside her. Around them, the garden flourished, the soil that had once been pale and lifeless now dark and rich. "We have built a good life," she said softly. "We have," Samuel agreed. "And it started right here with you refusing to give up on a patch of dirt that everyone said was hopeless." "I had help," Eleanor reminded him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I could not have done it alone." "Neither could I," Samuel said. He turned to kiss her, a kiss that still held the passion and promise of that first storm-swept embrace years ago. "We did it together, and we always will." Eleanor thought about her children playing in the house, about the farm that stretched around them, about the community they had become part of and helped to build. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that desperate widow with nothing but a dream of making something grow in impossible conditions, to a woman surrounded by abundance and love. The barren soil had taught her something important, that with patience, care, and the right help, even the most unlikely things could flourish. It was true of gardens, and it was true of hearts. She had planted hope in difficult ground, and with Samuel's help, she had grown not just vegetables but a family, a home, a life worth living. "I love you," she said to Samuel, words she had spoken countless times but that never lost their meaning. "I love you too," he replied, pulling her closer. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that. They sat in the gazebo as the sun set, two people who had taken a chance on each other and on a difficult piece of land, and who had reaped rewards beyond anything they could have imagined. The garden around them was evidence of what they could accomplish together, but the true garden they had cultivated was the one in their hearts, where love had taken root and grown into something strong enough to weather any storm. As darkness fell and the stars came out, they walked hand in hand back to the house, to the children and the life they had built. Behind them, the garden rested in the cooling air, plants heavy with fruit, soil rich with years of careful tending. And in the morning, they would wake and tend it again, together, as they had every day since Samuel had first stopped to help a widow plant hope in barren ground. The children grew and eventually struck out on their own, though none of them went far. Tommy took over the majority of the farm operations when he came of age, working alongside his father, and Danny with the same dedication that had built the place. Sarah married a rancher from the next county over and started her own garden, coming to her mother for advice and sharing her own discoveries. James studied agriculture at the new state university and came back full of ideas for crop rotation and soil management that helped the farm continue to evolve and improve. Eleanor and Samuel grew older together, their hair turning silver, their hands becoming gnarled from decades of work. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by years of shared experience, by weathering losses and celebrating triumphs, by the simple act of choosing each other every single day. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the farm for a celebration. There was food in abundance, most of it grown on the very land that had once seemed so hopelessly barren. There was music and laughter, and toasts to the couple who had built not just a farm but a legacy. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, Eleanor and Samuel walked out to the gazebo once more, moving more slowly now but still hand in hand. They sat on the bench that had held them so many times over the years and looked out at the garden silvered by moonlight. "You have any regrets?" Samuel asked, his voice rougher with age but still warm with love. Eleanor considered the question seriously. There had been hard times, certainly. Losses and struggles and moments of doubt. But when she weighed them against everything else, against the love and the joy and the sense of purpose that had filled her life since that day Samuel had ridden up asking for work, there was only one answer. "Not a single one," she said. "You gave me everything, Samuel. Not just help with the garden, but a reason to keep going when I thought I had nothing left. You gave me love and family and a life beyond anything I could have imagined." Samuel smiled and kissed her forehead gently. "You gave me the same, Eleanor. You took a drifting cowboy with nothing to his name and made him into a husband, a father, a man with roots that go deep. This farm, our children, all of it started because you were brave enough to let me help you." "We helped each other," Eleanor said, the truth of it settling around them like a blessing. "That was always the secret. Not that you saved me or I saved you, but that we saved each other." They sat together as the night deepened. Two people who had planted love in barren soil and had tended it carefully through seasons of drought and plenty, through storms and calm. Around them, the farm they had built slept peacefully, And the garden that had started it all stood as testament to what was possible when two people refused to give up on each other, or on the dream of making something beautiful grow in the most unlikely of places. In the end, that was the story Eleanor would want told if anyone ever asked. Not a story of a widow alone and struggling, or of a cowboy drifting without purpose, but a story of two people who found each other at exactly the right moment, who worked together to transform barren ground into fertile soil, and who grew not just a garden but a love strong enough to last a lifetime and beyond. When they finally rose from the bench and walked back to the house, their steps were slow but sure, their hands still clasped together just as they had been that first time, so many years ago. Behind them, the garden stretched out under the stars, alive and abundant, a living reminder that with love, patience, and partnership, even the most barren soil could be transformed into something extraordinary. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the Colorado mountains and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Eleanor and Samuel would wake in each other's arms, grateful for another day together, ready to tend the garden they had planted and the love they had grown, knowing that the best harvests came not from the ground but from the heart.